They're in pain. I know they're in pain, doctor. I'm his mother. They had an measles, rubella, and within a very short space of time, the light in their eyes had gone out. They'd lost their speech, their interaction. They no longer play with their siblings. They didn't sleep at night. And the nurses say, oh, that's just part of autism. Get over it. Put them in a home, forget about it, have another child. This doesn't happen. Children don't regress. You thought your child was talking, that he was saying helicopter, a complex word. But no, he was just grunting and making noises. I mean, it was the behavior of mainstream medicine to this problem was a disgrace. We had linked it to the MMR. My colleagues saying, Andy, we're pediatricians. And as pediatricians, we cannot be seen to criticize the safety of MMR. And the dean then said to me, if you continue this safety work, it will not be good for your career. It was an explicit threat.
I hear your name mentioned from time to time on, different podcasts and shows, and like, Andy Wakefield was right. Andy Wakefield was right. So can you tell us the story for our listeners that might not be familiar in this generation? Tell us the story and, ultimately how you ended up being right and what you were ultimately correct about.
Well, yeah, delete everything you've read on Wikipedia and everything you've heard and start from the beginning. I was just a mainstream, whatever that means, mainstream physician, graduated in 1981 at St. Mary's Hospital Medical School in London. Now 7 generations of my family have been, have qualified as doctors from that medical school. Yeah.
So like...
Oh, way back.
1780s, 1750s?
Way back.
Wow.
And I was part of the University of London, which at the time still is, in fact, the biggest medical school in the world. And so I trained as a surgeon, got my fellowship of the Royal College of Surgeons, fellowship of the Royal College of Pathologists, and I put together a research team of about 19 people working at the Royal Free Hospital in London on inflammatory bowel disease, Crohn's disease and ulcerative colitis, 2 sort of epidemic diseases for which we didn't have an answer in terms of what is causing this. Or these conditions. And that was really, really exciting times. It was great until 1995, when it took a turn and I got a call from a parent of a child with autism saying my child was absolutely fine, normal, very much like the story you've just told, developing normally, and had speech language interaction with their siblings, absolutely on their milestones, walking, sleeping well, and that all changed. They had an measles, rubella, and within a very short space of time, the light in their eyes had gone out. Mm-hmm. They'd lost their speech, their interaction. They no longer play with their siblings. They didn't sleep at night. They're in pain. I know they're in pain, doctor. I'm his mother, and I can tell, even though he's lost the ability to communicate, I know he's in pain. And I said, look, I don't know why you're calling me. I know absolutely nothing about autism. I'm a gastroenterologist. And when I was at medical school, it was so rare. 1 in 10,000 kids, we weren't even taught about it.
Right.
And she said, doctor, the reason I'm calling you is because my child has intractable gastrointestinal problems, bloating, diarrhea, all of these things. And the doctors that I go to and the nurses say, oh, that's just part of autism. Get over it. Put them in a home, forget about it, have another child. And I just thought, this is bizarre. I mean, we're living in the Middle Ages. Yeah. This was madness. Children are born with this condition. It's intractable. It can't be treated. And this doesn't happen. Children don't regress. You thought your child was talking, that he was saying helicopter, a complex word. But no, he was just grunting and making noises. Right. I mean, it was the behavior of mainstream medicine to this problem was a disgrace, an absolute disgrace. And this story came to me from so many parents. It was so coherent, it was so consistent that I said to my colleagues, we're going to look at this. And I put together a research team, including the world's leading pediatric gastroenterologist at the time, Professor John Walker-Smith, eminent people between them, had published 5,000 papers. I mean, this was a wonderful group of academics. And lo and behold, long story short, the parents were absolutely right. The children had intestinal inflammation. And then we went on after the Lancet paper, which I can talk about, to publish 15 further papers characterizing that bowel disease and showing that it was novel. It wasn't food allergy. It wasn't Crohn's. It wasn't colitis. It was something different. And that was fascinating. But here's the problem. We had linked it to the MR, or the parents had told us this. And we have an obligation, an absolute obligation, particularly in fact, in view of the fact that the parents were right.
Yeah.
The medical profession has said, no, they don't have a bowel disease. And yes, they did. And then we had the videos of them before their behavioral decline, and they were speaking and talking. And the evidence was there that they had lost their skills. But oh no, medicine said regression does not happen. They're born with it. No, they're not. And so I found myself alienated, my colleagues saying, Andy, we're pediatricians. And as pediatricians, we cannot be seen to criticize the safety of MR. I said, what the hell does that mean? What does that mean? Your obligation is to these parents. That's what you've signed the Hippocratic Oath for. That's what you've taken this oath for. What do you mean? Is this because it affects the perception of your colleagues of you at the Royal Society? Because it's unfashionable to question safety? What about this story, which you've told me in private you absolutely believe, and it can only be the MR? And so we, on moral and ethical grounds, we kind of drifted apart. And the dean then said to me, if you continue, I was in his office one day, I was leaving, he stopped me and he said, if you continue this in safety work, it will not be good for your career. It was an explicit threat. He was absolutely right.
Yeah.
It wasn't good for my career, but there I was, an obstinate, enthusiastic young surgeon, and it just made me angry. It just made me angry. What was I going to do? Go to the mother in the clinic with her child next to her, running around, banging his head on the floor, and say, I know your story's right, but I'm sorry. There's the door. Go and find someone else and shut it behind you. That's not what I signed up for. This wasn't brave or clever. It's just, I signed up to do this work. And I found such extraordinary pushback. So we published the paper in The Lancet. It was a case series. It didn't test any hypothesis of causation. It didn't say...
Just for our audience to know, the Lancet is the preeminent peer-reviewed medical journal in the world, correct? Or just about?
Its reputation suffered dramatically after.
But at
COVID.
the time, it was...
Yeah.
It's the biggest accolade you can get is to get published in the Lancet.
Yeah, that got a lot of attention. And that attention was both good and bad. Of course, parents came flooded to us for help for their children. But at the same time, you had offended, and here's the problem. You had offended everybody, the pharmaceutical companies, the governments of the world, the professional organizations like the American Medical Association, who survive on endorsements, money from the pharmaceutical companies, by the media, people like Rupert Murdoch, who has a lot of investments in Australia, and the World Health Organization, UNICEF, everybody. Now, people now are familiar with cancel culture, doctors being, and they're familiar with papers being retracted and doctors being removed because they've said something that goes against the grain, against the status quo. But then it was unheard of.
No, you were the poster child for that.
It was extraordinary, and they just came at me in the biggest way.